Hello, and welcome to the Karen Hilly Phillips Center at Pacific Lutheran University in Tacoma and the first debate in the 2018 race for U.S. Senate. I'm Mary Naum from KOMO News, alongside Essex Porter from KIRO 7 and Brandi Kruse from Q13 Fox.
This debate has been organized by the Washington State Debate Coalition, which was founded by Seattle CityClub in 2016 to enhance Washingtonians' access to those who hold and seek our state's highest elected offices. Financial support has been provided by our lead sponsors, AARP of Washington, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and the Norcliffe Foundation. We also want to thank Pacific Lutheran University, along with the Bethel, Eatonville, Franklin Pierce, and Tacoma school districts for hosting this event.
As you watch the debate, we invite you to join the conversation on social media using the hashtag WAElects. The audience here in the hall has agreed to remain silent. No cheers, no applause, no boos, no hisses. They've agreed to hold their applause until the end of the debate, except for now as we meet the candidates. Republican Susan Hutchison.
Hello.
And Senator, thank you for that applause. And Senator Maria Cantwell, the Democrat.
Thank you.
Welcome to you both.
Well, let's get right to it. The format for tonight's debate is very simple. Each candidate will have 1 minute and 30 seconds for an opening statement. Questions will be asked of both candidates, and they will each have 1 minute to reply. The moderators will lead a follow-up discussion on that topic before we move on to the next question.
So let's get started. We have flipped a coin, and Maria Cantwell will have the first opening statement. Senator Cantwell, you have 1 minute and 30 seconds.
Thank you. I want to thank PLU, the moderators, Susan Hutchison, and the commission for organizing this debate. You know, today, many political leaders are more interested in sound bites than getting something done. I want you to know that when it comes to Washington State, I'll work with whoever I can to get results. Right now, I'm working with Republicans and Democrats on getting the first ever federal tax incentive for apprentice so we can skill and train more workers for today's jobs. I helped push through a new GI Bill to expand the benefits for our veterans to get education at a longer period of time when it fits into their lives. I fought when the Air Force gave the tanker contract to the wrong company. I made sure that Boeing ultimately built those planes and built it here in Washington State. And I supported and fought to get the reauthorization of the Export-Import Bank so our small businesses could have new markets overseas for their great products. I will stand up to my party when necessary, as I did in voting against the bailout of Wall Street. And I will stand up to this president when he was wrong about cutting wildfire funding, and instead we restored $2 billion to make sure we're cost-effective in protecting our communities. The last thing we need right now in Washington is a rubber stamp of the Trump agenda. I'm going to fight for our economy for everyone, improving access to health care, protecting our public lands, and changing our environment to be a cleaner energy economy. That's what I'm going to fight for. I'm going to continue to get results for Washington because that's what matters.
Ms. Hutchison, your opening statement.
Thank you. I'm Susan Hutchison, and I want to win this race for you because we are in desperate need of change in Washington, D.C. and Washington State. We're enjoying a thriving economy, the likes of which we haven't seen in years, but my opponent, Senator Cantwell, worked furiously against the Tax Cuts and Jobs bill that's helping us with this tremendous prosperity. She's just out of touch with working men and women. Everywhere I go across the state, people say to me, Susan, where is Maria? She's been in office for 18 years and we never see her. Well, that's because she's become a professional career politician beholden to the DC swamp. In fact, we had trouble getting her here for this debate. Even Democrats come up to me and say, Susan, I'm voting for you because I can't take it anymore. Things have gotten so crazy. Well, as a longtime resident of Seattle, I understand how they feel. You know, I'm a military wife, mother, and daughter, and as such, I care so deeply for the people of this country that they stay safe, and also for our military men and women in uniform. One of them is my son, Brian, a U.S. Marine Corps lieutenant. My other son, John, is also in the audience. He's in a different profession, but both boys say they want to come home to Washington State for their future. So I'm fighting for their future, but I'm fighting for your future too, and your kids and your grandkids' future. You know, some of you remember me from the old days of the news, and I want you to know you trusted me then, and you can trust me now as your next U.S. Senator. I will be your voice, I will fight for you, and we can win this together.
Thank you both for your opening statements. We start our questions with a topic that's on the minds of many Americans: sexual misconduct and the Me Too movement. In the Me Too era, how do we treat sexual assault accusers with respect when they come forward while still protecting people from false allegations? Susan Hutchison, you have the first answer. You have 1 minute.
Thank you. Let me just start by saying I've been an advocate for women all my adult life. In fact, in my first job, I went on strike to fight for pay equity for women. It turned out that every woman in my newsroom was paid less than every single man in the newsroom, no matter what their job. We went on strike, and I walked a picket line for 2 months. Also, near the end of my career, I took my company, a gigantic corporation, to task over their discrimination against me. And in doing so, I won a settlement that made sure that they would obey the laws and never treat women the way they treated me. I know the Me Too movement. I was in television news for 2 decades. I understand fully what that means. And I was a victim of it like so many women in the workplace. And so women can never be dismissed. When I got tired of certain activity, I would go to my boss and I would complain, and sometimes there were repercussions for doing that. But even so, we have to keep fighting. The Me Too movement has been very, very important to all of us women in the workplace and women who have struggled to reach their potential. And so I've been fighting for them and will continue to do so.
Thank you. Senator Cantwell, you have 1 minute to answer the same question, ma'am.
This is so important that we stand up for those who have been the victims of sexual assault. We know now in the United States of America that it's 30% of women and maybe as many as 50% of Native American women. So what we have to do is address those cultural issues and put protections in place so these people can be heard. We know that from information from law enforcement that and psychologists that maybe between 2 and 8% of people who come forward may not be being truthful. So we know that anybody who's coming forward has a great risk in doing so, and we need to make sure we have a process to listen to them. We've been able to pass new laws protecting women against violence, particularly our immigrant and Native American community, by making sure that federal laws work better in their favor. We've done other things to change our processes in Washington, D.C., but these people need to be heard.
As you're both aware, our nation's newest Supreme Court Justice, Brett Kavanaugh, was accused by 3 women of sexual misconduct. The allegations, which he denies, date back more than 30 years. In one case, he's accused of forcefully groping a teenage girl at a high school party when he was just 17 years old himself. Should our actions as teenagers be held against us for life? Senator Cantwell.
Well, this was a job interview for someone to be on the highest court of the land at a time when they are definitely going to change the balance of the court. So I thought a background check, like every judicial nominee and almost every high-level cabinet or ranking member in an administration has an FBI background check. So I thought those were important issues to consider. And it is up to Congress then to make its decision based on that information, how they would decide on information presented. What I think happened here, though, is we didn't have a full investigation. We had an investigation once various people came forward, but not a complete investigation. And given the challenges we face in society with institutions ignoring this evidence, I wanted to make sure we did not rush to curtail that investigation.
Ms. Hutchison, do you care to respond to that? Should things we do in adolescence be held against us when we're adults?
Well, let me go back to the confirmation hearings because they were a national disgrace. The Democrats had knowledge of a woman's letter 2 months before it was investigated, and I put the disgracefulness of that hearing squarely at the feet of the Democrats. They treated her poorly, they exploited her suffering, they controlled her lawyers so that they wouldn't tell her the things she needed to know, and they basically took away her rights to privacy. In the meantime, they besmirched a man who had an impeccable record of jurisprudence. And so everybody wonders, why would any good person step up to run for public office or put their name up for nomination, considering what this could do to their lives and their families. I feel badly for their daughters, Judge Kavanaugh's wife, and for all the people who suffered during this whole period. But I blame squarely the Democrats who used this game for their own political ends.
I would like to get to an issue that hits closer to home. Washington State currently has a we have 1 minute left. Washington State currently has a backlog of more than 6,000 untested rape kits. How can we say we care about victims of sexual assault while shelving evidence for decades that could bring their attackers to justice? Susan Hutchison, you can answer first, but you have just 30 seconds.
Well, I think that's terrible, and I think we need to put the funding behind it in order to deal with the rape cases, in order to bring these rapists to justice. One of my closest friends, one of my most beloved friends, was raped at night point in a hotel room when she came into her hotel room and the rapist was hiding behind the curtain. He got away, and they never found him, and she experienced that rape over and over again in her life as she tried to cope with it. She is a woman of courage, and as time went on, she was able to write a book about it and turn it into a nonprofit organization that deals with rape kits and that helps women come to terms. Fear to freedom is her mantra.
Senator, I'll give you 30 seconds.
I have supported funding to make sure those rape kits are counted and worked previously with Dave Reichert and the Sheriff's Department. And now we've fallen behind again. So we should analyze and have information for every one of those rape kits, because what happened when we analyzed the results before, we found people who were the perpetrators of those crimes. Some of them were in jail already, but the confidence and security that gave to that victim to know that they were already behind bars was so important to us. But I just want to make sure that I'm clear about one thing. I believe Dr. Ford. And I believe that this is very important for us to continue to believe people who have corroborating evidence on these kinds of cases.
Thank you both.
We'll switch to the economy, and Senator Cantwell, a question goes to you first. The Trump tax cuts for families will expire after 10 years. Should they be made permanent? If so, how do you pay for them without adding to the $2 trillion those cuts have already tacked onto the deficits? And maybe you're willing to repeal a portion of the tax cuts that benefit the richest Americans. Be specific. Take 1 minute.
I didn't support the tax bill because I didn't want to raise taxes on middle-class families in Washington. Hundreds of thousands of Washingtonians actually had their taxes raised as they got rid of our deductions that I fought so hard to restore before. These are things that Washingtonians count on because they have, obviously, expenses now that they've seen. We live in an expensive area for housing, for education. These are important tools. So to me, what's important now is that we don't have a president who is trying to deny federal workers, 60,000 federal workers in our state, their COLA because we gave that money away in the tax break instead. That's what he's doing right now, saying that 60,000 federal workers in Washington don't deserve their COLA. So what we need to do is go back and get a tax bill that's fair for middle-class families, and I will work to do that.
Ms. Hutchison, 1 minute. If you make the tax cuts permanent, can you do so by cutting Social Security or Medicare? Do you want to see the tax cuts expire?
Well, all you have to do is look at the statistics. We have 4 million new jobs since those tax cuts took effect, and we've got almost that many people off of food stamps. This is progress, and the most important thing about jobs is they give people dignity, and dignity gives people hope. I celebrate the low unemployment, in fact, the record historic unemployment of African Americans, Hispanics, Asian Americans, and women. That all comes because tax cuts spurs the economy and encourages the growth of new jobs. That is what is going to give people hope for the future. And there is no denying that people have more money in their pockets and they know better how the government does how to spend their own money.
Now we'll take a few minutes for discussion, and this can be a balanced conversation. Let me ask you first, Ms. Hutchison. I don't think you quite answered whether you want to see the tax cuts made permanent and how.
Oh, yes, I would like to see the tax cut made permanent. And in fact, I think there's room for more tax cuts. You know, anytime that we can improve the economy, anytime we improve the economy by lowering taxes, it's a good thing for all of us, but it's especially good for those on the lower ends of the socioeconomic system. And for them to be able to get jobs, entry-level jobs, increase their hours, increase their wages, all of that comes with a thriving economy.
Senator Cantwell?
So it's so important right now that we understand that the Republican Party is now saying they want to privatize Social Security and Medicare. They want to get rid of the 650,000 people that had expansion under the Affordable Care Act in our state to get affordable insurance, all to pay for what was given away in that tax bill. So I do not want Washingtonians hurt by a future Republican Congress that wants to take away the benefits that now they say, after they've added $2 trillion to the debt, that they don't have the resources to pay for. So I'm going to fight for protecting Social Security and Medicare and the healthcare expansion that was so important. When we do those things that were our primary responsibilities, then we can talk about what else we can do in making sure we have a fair tax system. Now,
let me press you as well, because I don't think you quite answered if the current tax cuts should be made permanent for middle-class families.
I'm happy to work on middle-class tax cuts to make them permanent, but I'm not going to do it by raising taxes on hundreds of thousands of Washingtonians, which this bill does. So I wouldn't continue that.
Yeah. Ms. Hutchison?
Well, I think Senator Cantwell is living in the past, because I don't know any Republicans that are talking about privatizing unless there's a blue ribbon panel that's looking at every option in order to save Social Security. I was chairman of the Washington State Republican Party, and all we want to let you all know is that we will support Social Security and make sure that it is available for you and your children and your grandchildren, because we're all paying into it and we expect a return. Now, Senator Cantwell, back when she ran for office for the first time, made a promise, and she repeated it over and over and over in her first debate, and that was that she was going to make Social Security secure. Well, guess what? Social Security is about to run out in about 15 years.
Okay,
so Senator Cantwell is not going to be able to fix it now. So that will fall to me to fix the problem. But I guarantee you, we will.
All right. Please, a quick answer.
They are on their way to trying to cut these benefits. And I give the example of our federal employees because they are already first on the chopping block. So it's so important that we do not give a corporate tax break away to the largest corporations. In fact, companies here in our state whose employees are paying more personal taxes just to give that corporation a tax break and then turn around and put Social Security at risk. I have fought both Democrat and Republican administrations on this issue of a cost of living increase. It's called change CPI. They always have a gimmick to lower your COLA for Social Security. I will never let them do that.
We need to wrap this up. Thank you.
Moving on to health care now, and Ms. Hutchison, if you can respond first, and you will have 1 minute to do so. The question is, nobody plans on getting cancer or getting hit by a car or having a baby diagnosed with a birth defect. Even after the Affordable Care Act, and even with the current administration's proposal for skinny health care coverage plans, access and affordability remain a big struggle for many people. What is the solution for a health care system that can financially cripple someone for getting sick?
Well, when we look at our healthcare policy, the two things that are most important is that we have access, that everyone is covered at a reasonable cost. The problem with Obamacare is it really was made and put together. Remember, it was so complex that nobody knew what it said until they had passed it. And so we're stuck with the consequences, which raised the cost of health care tremendously. And of course, it was put together by the big three: big pharma, big hospital systems, and big insurance companies. The only way to lower the cost of medical care is the free market system. And everybody knows that. I grew up in a military family. For 26 years of my life, I had socialized medicine. That's what they mean, the Democrats mean, when they say Medicare for all or universal coverage or whatever. I've lived through it, and I'll tell you what it's like. It's like the VA. You wait in line for days, weeks, months for your help, and you don't have your own doctor. Well, I was happy at age 26 to go on to a private plan, my husband's medical plan in his company, and on that plan, I got to choose my doctor, and I got to make choices. My medical decisions were made between me and my doctor, not me and a bureaucrat.
Thank you. Senator Cantwell.
Freudian slip.
It's so important to make sure that we have access to affordable health care. And that is what the Affordable Care Act did. So your question about people who were literally going bankrupt because of it, we've reduced, I think, in half the number of people who've had medical-related bankruptcies. And we have cut drastically the number of people who don't have insurance now that we have the Affordable Care Act. So I mentioned the 650,000 people in our state that have been covered under the expansion, including our veterans, who I have heard from all over our state how happy they are that they have had this basic coverage through that expansion in addition to what they've been doing. Access to health care is a universal issue, and it's a basic right. And the Affordable Care Act has provisions in it that are offering affordable insurance, not junk insurance, but affordable insurance for $35 a month, and that is what I want us to pursue here in Washington.
I'd like to continue our discussion with healthcare. Even in today's stronger economy, a recent survey by Career Builder showed that 8 in 10 Americans live paycheck to paycheck, and the reality is that for most people, care boils down to cost. Do you believe fundamental care should only be given if you can afford it? Ms. Hutchison.
Well, actually, we've got about 6 delivery systems currently in use in America today. One, of course, is the private health care insurance that comes with your job. Of course, we've got Medicare and Medicaid. We've got the charitable health care system. And we have Obamacare. And so we are all wanting for ourselves and for others to get the coverage that we need in order to make sure that we have our ailments taken care of. Now, when it comes to the uninsured, we made a big stride forward with Obamacare, no question. They all went under Medicaid, but somebody has to pay for that. And in this state, we are going to be paying a mighty price in the years to come because there just wasn't enough money to cover those Medicaid patients. And so we also had to raid Medicare in order to cover Obamacare to the tune of almost $1 trillion. And because of that, Medicare, which so many seniors depend on, is running out of money, and they're going to be insolvent eventually also. So these are all problems we need to solve, but again, it has to be solved through a free market system where competition lowers the prices and provides the coverage so that no one goes without.
Senator Cantwell.
No one should get cut off of health care because they don't have insurance. But when you don't provide solutions for the marketplace, basically what happens is that uncompensated care runs up the cost for all of us and makes all of our insurance more expensive. The bottom line is the Republican Party is bankrupt on good ideas for affordable health care. Their notion of junk insurance is just about a race to the bottom, having cheap insurance that doesn't cover you, and you end up in the hospital finding out that your costs are not covered. I do have a market solution, and it was based on our basic health plan here in Washington State. I started working on that when somebody came to visit me to protest the Affordable Care Act, but told me, I'm a Tea Party person. I love the basic health plan. So I started working, and now that is the law of the land, and we too can pursue it. In New York and Minnesota, they're doing it, and people are buying and negotiating on drug prices for $35 a month. And that is what would be a true market solution. It bundles up individuals so that they can have the clout that you have when you're a large employer and working an employee. We cannot allow the Republicans to strike down the pre-existing clause that covers people who have a pre-existing condition. If we do that, those people, even if you work for a major employer, could be jeopardized and paying more. This is coming before our courts today, and 39 Republican attorney generals are trying to strike it. I'm going to fight every day to protect people in our state on pre-existing conditions.
Thank you, Senator Cantwell. Ms. Hutchison, I have a yes and no question for you. Insurance companies are battling pre-existing conditions coverage, and the Trump Justice Department has said it would not defend that provision. If you were senator, would you have voted to repeal the ACA?
Yes, but we have to replace it with something workable. You know, when you take over 1/6 of the economy, as the ACA did, Obamacare, and throw the healthcare system into chaos, then of course you've got to have a solution and you've got to fix it. And what I think is needed is that it has to be a bipartisan effort. This idea that Obamacare passed with only Democrat votes, and Republicans didn't come with the Democrats in order, they pushed them out of the decision process because the Democrats knew that what they were working toward was socialized medicine. Obamacare was meant to fail so that we could move to socialized medicine, and thankfully, the Republicans are standing firm for the free market and for the people of this country. Now, I don't know where Senator Cantwell gets her ideas
Ms. Hutchison, I have
about
to cut you off now.
getting
We're out of
rid
time.
of
Thank you.
pre-existing conditions, but that's just not true among
Thank you both.
Republicans.
Before we get to the next question, we are inviting the audience here in the hall. I'm going to give you permission to be on your cell phones. And those of you watching the debate right now, live in the noon hour, to select a topic that you want to see addressed later in the debate. Here are the choices: the environment, gun policy, and dealing with opioid addiction. To vote, go to wadebates.org. That's wadebates.org. We move on now to border security and immigration. In 2017, President Trump announced he would end the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program. Since then, Congress has been completely incapable of finding a real solution for Dreamers, despite a bipartisan belief that children brought to the U.S. illegally through no fault of their own should not be returned to a country they barely know. What is your solution to DACA? Senator Cantwell, you can begin. You have 1 minute.
Thank you. I have voted for 3 different bills in the last several years that 2 have passed the United States Senate to cover those who, just as you said, were brought to this country not by their own accord, but have been educated here. They deserve a right to continue through our education system and to stay in the United States of America. That legislation that had gotten great bipartisan support out of the United States Senate didn't get support in the House of Representatives. We need to change the House of Representatives or get them to understand that these children deserve to have the American dream that they've grown up here. It breaks my heart now that I have constituents who tell me they might work at Microsoft or Boeing. They came here and have been working for that company. Their children were born here in the United States, and they go to high school or their grade school, and their classmates tell them to go home. To where? Redmond? To Issaquah? They were born here in the United States. So this president needs to get serious about protecting DACA recipients.
Ms. Hutchison, you have 1 minute, the same question. What is your solution to DACA?
Well, I think we did have a bipartisan bill that Maria Cantwell chose not to support, and that was the bill that said we are giving DACA Dreamers the opportunity to move towards citizenship and legality. And at the same time, we're going to make sure we secure the borders. We've got the weakest immigration laws on the books, practically of any nation in the world. They're certainly weaker than Mexico's and Canada's. And we need to make sure that our border is secure. The bill was comprehensive and it was right. And the fact that we don't have a solution for DACA is simply because of people like Maria Cantwell who refused to vote for it.
I want you both to really, in the spirit of this debate, take a hard look at your own party when you answer this question. Given the fact that people on both sides believe that these children shouldn't have to go back to a place they don't know, is your party responsible for using these Dreamers as political bargaining chips? Ms. Hutchison.
I don't think so, because I think American people are squarely behind the bill that I talked about that included security at the border and at the same time a path to citizenship for our young people. And you know, I've got a friend who's a border control officer up on the Canadian border. And everybody who serves at our border on the north also has to serve first at the southern border. And he's made it very clear. He says, oh, we all know there are parts of our border that have to have a physical wall. There's just no way around it.
We will move on to border security, but I'm asking about Dreamers being used as political bargaining chips.
Well, I think the Democrats use lots of things for political bargaining chips, and so
Senator Cantwell, what do you say to
that?
Have these Dreamers been used by Democrats as political bargaining chips?
I think it's very important. Now, I would say the bills that passed the United States Senate on bipartisan support that have Dreamers protected have been supported majority the Democrats and a handful or half of the Republicans. So we have more work to do. But here's what I think. I think it's too important of an issue to just allow the uncertainty for these children. I would support a standalone DACA bill today, tomorrow, at any moment to make sure that we resolve this issue. I'm proud that President Obama protected them This administration came in and said he wasn't going to protect them.
I do want to ask about border security. You're only going to have 30 seconds each to answer this question. The Drug Enforcement Agency in Seattle tells me the majority of the heroin they seized in Washington state was trafficked here from Mexico. Given the fact that hundreds of Washingtonians die every single year of opioid overdoses, do you believe that building a wall along the southern border could help save lives? Susan Hutchison.
Well, there's no question about it. You know, the majority of Americans want the border to be secure because they understand that the drug cartels are now very professional and they're multi-billion-dollar organizations. They bring people across the border for human trafficking, including children. They bring drugs across the border. They bring fentanyl, the synthetic heroin, and all of it is against us. Criminals, traffickers, coyotes bringing their poor, unsuspecting individuals who are coming to America thinking they've got a promise, and instead they're left in a desert in Arizona to die.
Senator Hutchison,
all of this causes lives.
Susan Hutchison, Senator Cantwell, I want to make sure you get your full 30 seconds on that.
Thank you. I think border security is very important, but I take what Tom Ridge, the former Homeland Security Director, said, that building the wall would be a waste of money, that more agents, better technology, and the laws we just passed last week on a bipartisan basis that I helped get passed is basically making sure that we police our mail system, our U.S. mail system, so their drugs aren't getting in there. It gave more money to our sheriffs, which they all came to me and said they needed, like Sheriff Pastor here in Pierce County. So we got them the funding to fight, because in the past they cut down on 26 different drug rings in our state because we gave them HIDTA dollars. So use our money wisely, but saying you're going to build a physical infrastructure across 360,000 area of the Mexican border, as Tom Ridge said, not cost effective.
Thank you both.
I want to go on the record to say that I have declared that we have to have a wall physical, and if it's better to have electronic or law enforcement, but we have to secure the border.
All right, we need to move on to the next topic, also very important, national security. The question goes to you first, Ms. Hutchison, take 1 minute. We are next to Joint Base Lewis McChord, where soldiers have been training to drive their military vehicles in Korea. Naval ships based in Everett and Bremerton take part in training exercises also off Korea. President Trump just said he loves the North Korean leader. So do you trust President Trump to negotiate an effective agreement to get North Korea to give up its nuclear weapons?
You know, I can't explain a lot of things about the art of the deal. I haven't read the book, but I've been watching President Trump, and all I know is you have to judge him by the results. We've got North and South Korea talking with one another for the first time in 70 years. I call that progress. And when it comes to training and being sure that we're ready for any threat, my husband was a Marine Corps reservist for years. He spent summers, 2 weeks of every summer, training and in exercises in South Korea. We know that they are a threat. There's no question. There are no rose-colored glasses when it comes to Kim Jong-un. But I want to point out that our president has made America strong, and it's important for us to look at the results of his negotiating tactics and encourage for all of Americans to get behind our defenses, and especially our wonderful Secretary of Defense, Jim Mattis.
Senator Cantwell, take 1 minute. Do you trust President Trump on North Korea?
Well, I think it's very important to have dialogue and talks between South Korea, North Korea, and the United States, and make sure that North Korea does not continue its production of a nuclear weapon that could reach the United States or other areas. You do that best by gaining support of a multinational approach to also hold North Korea accountable with sanctions that are enforced. That is to put pressure on Russia and China and other people. But when you go and throw down on NATO and other countries in Europe, it's hard to go back and build that support. My father served in World War II, and his brother was a glider pilot and was captured and was in a POW camp. So I grew up in a family where we stood up for our other nations that were partners of ours. By building those partnerships, that is the best way we are going to hold North Korea accountable and stop their economic power by having their product exported through Russia and China.
As we open up our discussion, let me throw out another important national security issue that affects us here locally. And we'll begin with Senator Cantwell. JBLM lost another soldier in Afghanistan 7 weeks ago. Yesterday was the 17th anniversary of military action there, but the Taliban is still active in nearly half the country. Is it time to bring the troops home?
It's very important that we have a political solution in Afghanistan where the United States, the Taliban, and the Afghan government sit down and reach a ceasefire and a political solution for that government to move forward. That's what Jim Mattis and others are trying to do right now. And I have a former staffer who has just been deployed there and is coming home next week. So I will get an even more updated version from him. But right now, what's stymieing us is that continued fighting between the Taliban and the existing government. And what's really important is that we stop the Russians or the Iranians from being proxy involved in Afghanistan and get Pakistan to help stabilize that region.
So to summarize, you believe the troops should stay?
I think the troops that we have there now are trying to protect the foothold that we have in stabilizing that region. And when Secretary Mattis says that they should come home, those limited troops, what he's trying to do now is get this discussion between all parties to happen, and that's what I support.
Ms. Hutchison, what do you think of that? 17 years, U.S. troops in Afghanistan, and still half the country, the Taliban is active. Is it time to bring the troops home?
Well, you know, it was an endless war, and my opponent, Maria Cantwell, voted over and over again to pay for endless wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. And as a matter of fact, it's the longest war we've ever fought. You know, I know a lot of people who went to Afghanistan, many of them my relatives, and Iraq. And we all know somebody who has been wounded or killed in that conflict. And I just want to remind everybody that my background in the military world, both as a daughter, wife, and mom, I will not cast votes without being absolutely sure that when we go to war, we have an exit strategy and we know why we're there. I think it is so.
Before we run out of time, you brought up one thing. You talked about Senator Cantwell's votes. When you are in the Senate, will you vote against money for the troops in Afghanistan?
You know, I have been incredibly impressed with how quickly the President and our Defense Department has moved in the Middle East to bring an end to ISIS. ISIS used to be every day in the news, and now we don't even talk about it. We used to talk about casualties every day in that war, and we hardly ever mention it because they're so seldom. And so what I want to say is that I trust the President and General Mattis, our Secretary of Defense, and I trust most of all our armed forces and our well-trained military that knows how to fight and is ready to be called up when they're needed, as long as it's the right war.
We'll move on to trade and tariffs now, and Senator Cantwell, you'll have 1 minute to respond first. The question is, our state is the third largest exporter of food and agriculture products, with the majority destined for Asia. Recent trade wars this summer cost local farmers millions of dollars. How do you protect the interests of Washington farmers and manufacturers who are caught in the crosshairs of an international trade war?
Well, I want everyone to know that I'm going to continue to fight for the 90,000 Washingtonians that are involved in agriculture. We want to open up markets, not close them. The president has got to stop using tariffs as a first line of action and use it as a last line in trade disputes. The fact that our cherry growers now have $84 million in losses because cherries didn't get through to China is something we're working hard now to resolve. And while the Ag Secretary says and the President says they want to help, there is no clear solution for how they will be protected. And now we're approaching apple season, and we're going to see the same thing. Because of the tariffs the President has now put on, it is hard for us to gain access in Asia, in India, in Mexico, and in other places because of these huge tariffs. And not only are the tariffs a problem, the fact that these countries can just stop shipment. And so we have now gotten into a trade war that is costing us and an ag economy a lot of money.
Thank you. Ms. Hutchison, you have 1 minute.
Thank you. I think it's interesting that Senator Cantwell, who spends so little time in this state, likes to talk for the farmers. I have received the Farm Bureau's endorsement, in fact, before the primary, and they've said we're 200% behind you, Susan. And that's because they know that I'll be fighting for them. I've talked to the cherry farmers, and you know what they say? They say they're concerned about the uneven playing field that was in place long before President Trump was elected. And they are so pleased that he's fighting for them to make the free trade fair. I think you cannot deny that when we've got a new NAFTA between the United States and Mexico, the United States and Canada, and that now the president is going after the big cheese, China, to help fix the trade disparities that have really hurt our farmers over the decades. The farmers are willing to experience a little short-term pain for long-term gain. Now, when we had the cherry problem, of course, agile markets were able to find new markets for the cherries. They got to Vietnam, for example. The world loves our exports. We export wheat, we export apples, cherries, hay. It's amazing all the exports that we have and we grow in our state. It is a marvel, and I am so proud to have their endorsement.
Ms. Hutchison, thank you. Recently, the Justice Department revealed that China was responsible for stealing billions in intellectual property. At a time when foreign governments are hacking their way into both our private and public sectors, how do you better protect our virtual borders with regard to intellectual property? Senator Cantwell?
Well, first of all, I have led in the United States Senate in trying to get stronger cybersecurity capabilities. They're not only just hacking and stealing our intellectual property, they are a threat to our national security. When they hack into our national labs or hack into our electricity grid, like the Russians helping to decimate things in Ukraine, it becomes the new type of warfare. So we need stronger cybersecurity, network infrastructure, and to realize who is doing this work and work hard on an international basis to call them out. It's so important that we also get stronger enforcement of our intellectual property law, and I helped pass a $30 million program on trade enforcement that the now USTR office is using to help protect our intellectual property and win the day on these disputes. That's what we need to do, and we need to keep being forceful about the fact there's a growing economy outside the United States, and we want our products, software, agriculture, to reach those markets and have fair trade.
Ms. Hutchison.
Well, I think when I hear Senator Cantwell speak about hacking, I can't help but remember that the Chinese and the Russians hacked into Hillary Clinton's emails from her home server. You know, it is a deep concern, and it matters a lot to our tech companies, but it also matters to our manufacturing companies. The Chinese have been stealing intellectual property. It's part of their MO, and I think that this is one of the reasons why everybody should be cheering on the administration for fighting hard against the Chinese for our trade deals. We have to stop what they're doing. It's really theft. And so I am with the president and our administration for all the hard work they're doing in order to fix this problem. There's no question. I talked to the CIA about 10 years ago, and they talked about their need for experts because cybersecurity was such a crushing problem right now. We know it because the Russians are very good about it, or good at it, and we also know it because the Chinese are very proud of themselves for what they do. It's scary, and it is the way we are going to be fighting in the years ahead. And I want to make sure that we stay strong.
Thank you.
We move on now to governing style and values. Voters are sick of the bickering and the divisive politics and the flat-out rudeness on display in Washington, D.C. How will you pledge to help restore the civility? Susan Hutchison, you're first. You have 1 minute.
Well, I think we're in a very scary time. You know, we see and we saw this week that if you disagree with the Democrats on anything, their mob will come after you. And we know for sure that people who disagree with the senators, such as Ted Cruz and others, have been thrown out of restaurants or run out of restaurants when they're just trying to enjoy a private moment. We saw an open letter from one of the senator's wives that says she now sleeps with a loaded gun by her bed. And of course, this is not the way America should be. None of us should be afraid to be able to voice our opinion for fear of violence against us. And so this is something that is not good, and I think the American people are going to stand up against it. We're seeing that the polls changed after those Kavanaugh hearings because we don't want to be ruled by the mob. I know a lot of those folks are paid to come and protest by George Soros, who is one of the donors to my opponent, Maria Cantwell, and they've got a network. It's very strong and it's very well organized. But
your time is up, ma'am.
Regular Americans are fed up with the chaos and they can't take it anymore.
A friendly reminder to our audience of your pledge to remain silent. You'll have an opportunity at the end to applaud. Senator Cantwell, 1 minute.
This is a very important issue. And I think it's even more important because we live in an information age and we're going to have a lot of disruption. I know that you guys understand that in the media, but it's in education, it's in a lot of places. So we have to work to address those changes. That means working together. So the way I've done it is tried to work across the aisle using science and information. So I went to Orrin Hatch and said, we need to fix our homelessness problem and affordable housing. And I see in your state, you took care of your veterans and said housing first. And he said, yes, let's work together. I went to Jim Risch in Idaho, somebody I don't ideologically agree on with everything, and said, here is what's happening to both of us on fire. Let's look at this data and information and see if we can work together. And we were able to get a new fire funding fix that even the Wenatchee world basically said, hey, these people don't usually work together. In the Yakima Basin that we're trying to help improve water there, environmentalists, farmers, all working together. But you have to come to a table and be willing to collaborate and base it on good science.
Ms. Hutchison, I want to ask you a follow-up. I asked you what you would do to restore civility in politics. You did talk a lot about what the other party is doing to make it uncivil. You once called Senator Ted Cruz a traitor at the Republican National Convention when he refused to endorse President Trump. How do you think that sets a good example for civility?
I was speaking for everybody in that giant coliseum. There were thousands of people that
Everybody thought he was a traitor?
That he had betrayed his role at the National Convention. It was a small thing, and if I saw Ted Cruz today, he and I would shake hands and be friends. But that's not the point. I want to go back to what Maria Cantwell just said. Somehow or other, she took civility off to forest fires and the Yakima River Basin project. She has been an obstructor on all of this. We have 14 occasions where she either voted or blocked progress in managing our forests. And as far as the Yakima River Basin project, that is a group of bipartisan players, the conservationists, the tribe, the congressmen, and many others who've come together to fix that. And do you know that Senator Cantwell is unwilling to push that forward? She is not going to get it through this Congress. And they are profoundly disappointed because they put so much hard work into it. I just can't let her stand here and suggest that she gets things done. She doesn't get things done.
So you brought up bipartisanship. Senator Cantwell, in the spirit of bipartisanship and the intent of these questions, can you name at least one action taken by President Donald Trump that you think has benefited the people of Washington State?
Well, I do like the fact that in the Canadian agreement that we are going to change and get access to the dairy market, not so much their direct access, but on a world stage, not allowing them to be able to support with price support the export of their product, thereby disadvantaging us in the marketplace. I want the president to be able to call out those actions and negotiate a level playing field. So I do support that action.
I want you both to think about who we have in the hall today. Can I break a rule? If you're under the age of 25, can you shout? We have many young voters in the hall today. What would you say to those of them who are out there who feel put off by the divisive politics on display in D.C.? Ms. Hutchison, you can start.
Well, you know, we all know social media. And at the heart and soul of an awful lot of the conversations that hurt people, they start in social media. And I think it's a challenge for all of our young people to think first before they post. It's hard to be on the receiving end, and it sort of sets up a verbal warfare that isn't good for our society. And I also think that as time goes on, as more and more people understand that we as Americans have got to close ranks and work together, which is something that I have done in my career in many different workplaces where people were at odds with each other. If we find the common bond that ties us together, that is how we bring peace among warring factions inside government.
And moving on to Senator Cantwell again, what is your message to young voters who are watching the divisiveness in D.C. and just don't know what to make of it?
That we do need to work together, that they live in an age that is going to be dominated by information, and they know that. And so by sharing that information and working together on ideas where we can collaborate and are based on solid scientific information will help us move forward. I think that is why they're so supportive of doing something about our environment and climate change, because they know that this is real. It is why they also support strong net neutrality laws that this administration is trying to roll back, because they know the future is about everyone having access to that information. So I hope that the young people that are here today will not lose faith, but feel more empowered with the tools they know best and help us get to that ground of agreement to move forward on solutions that will help us.
Thank you both.
We are nearing the end of our time. The final topic here has been selected by the audience here in the hall and people watching the live broadcast. Now, the choices were the environment, gun policy, and opioid addiction, and our audience chose gun policy. So, Senator Cantwell, the next question is for you, a 1-minute response. Federal law sets the age to buy pistols at 21, but the legal age to buy semi-automatic rifles is 18. Should the age to buy semi-automatic rifles be raised to 21?
Yes, it should.
Even though that limits the constitutional rights of someone who is already at the age of majority?
You know, I think the courts made a very important decision in 2008 that said, yes, the right to bear arms is not just about militia, but it doesn't mean that the United States Senate can't do something to better protect our students at schools, or like the incident that happened at a Mukilteo house party. And by taking up laws like raising the age on assault weapons, banning bump stocks, getting extreme person laws in place, that is a law that would help us say that a family or a court could decide whether somebody really shouldn't have access to that weapon. You can get these guns out of the hands of people who shouldn't be holding them. I also believe in a universal background check so that people know that an FBI investigation of who is buying that weapon has been done.
Ms. Hutchison, should teenagers be allowed to buy semi-automatic rifles?
I don't think teenagers should be, but
18-year-olds can now.
I do believe that an 18-year-old who can go to war and carry a gun should have the right as a law-abiding citizen and under the protections of the Second Amendment to own a gun. Now, the problem with an awful lot of the rhetoric about gun control is that it is intended to punish those law-abiding citizens who use guns properly, which is well over 99% of our gun owners, and not punish those who have used them in the wrong way. And you know, a lot of what needs to happen in this country, and I would champion this going forward, is we need to put mental illness forward as a national issue that needs to be tackled, focused on, and treated and cured. It is a shame that so many people are in fear in our schools because of the work of people who are mentally imbalanced. In fact, the reports on the Parkland shooter that went to authorities about the instability of that young man, everything could have been prevented if anyone had taken it seriously. But because we don't have a national dialogue about mental illness, these issues are not taken seriously, and we must, and it's totally related to gun use.
All right, let's continue our discussion on guns. And question first for Senator Cantwell. Should federal law penalize gun owners when they fail to store their weapons safely and those weapons are then used to hurt and kill someone?
Well, I think that the laws that we should have on the books is to make sure that people do follow good gun safety. And for assault weapons, I know there's discussions about raising that standard to an even higher level. I think it's so important that we do have safety requirements and safety education, but I'll leave it up to the courts to determine whether someone has followed that or not.
Should safe storage be the law with penalties if the gun gets away from someone and someone else is hurt? Well,
safe storage is really important in my house, where I have a former Marine and 2 sons who have gone bird hunting with their dad and taken the safety course. We definitely, of course, have our guns in safes, and that is the law. But of course, self-defense is another reason why people use guns. Women who have been victims of domestic violence should have the freedom to have a loaded gun by their bed. They should be able to access them without going through a safe and trying to remember under stress what the combination is, and being able to load the gun at the last minute. All of that is related to our Second Amendment rights, that we do have the right to defend ourselves. And so an awful lot of these gun laws also hurt women. And so we need to remember that for every attempt to curtail the legal rights of gun owners, we are putting some people at risk.
Senator Cantwell, do the gun safety laws hurt women?
No, and they don't hurt children. And what we're seeing from families at Cafe Racer or from the incident in Nevada, that people want us to do more. If you think of the Parkland families, or you think of the kids in the families in Connecticut, people want us to do more. And that is why this law that we were able to pass here on extreme persons has actually shown great results. It's only in 3 states, but I'm going to work to get it passed federally. Because when you can go to a court and say that I believe this person is in danger either to themselves or others, just think of that information in the case in Connecticut or in Florida that may have stopped that individual from possessing that weapon. We need to make sure that we have better laws on the books.
Not all, but many of the horrific mass shootings have been done with assault-style semi-automatic weapons. Quick reply here, should they be banned?
Well, there are a lot of definitions of assault weapons. A hammer could be an assault weapon if used improperly. But when we're talking about guns, we're talking about semi-automatic, and that is the ability to shoot more than 1 round without reloading. And so definitely when we see what happened in Las Vegas with an individual who hauled guns after guns into his hotel room, and they were semi-automatic, you know, we've got an issue where we would love to ban those kinds of guns. Let me cut you off only because I need to give Senator Cantwell a chance for a quick response. Take about 10 seconds.
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
That is all the time we have for tonight's debate. Thank you to the candidates for this discussion of the issues in the race for U.S. Senate, and thank you to our audience here at PLU. Now you can feel free to give the candidates a round of applause.
Thank you.
These candidates will meet again for a televised town hall-style debate on Saturday, October 20th at Spokane Community College.
Tonight's debate was organized by the Washington State Debate Coalition. Thank you very much. Thank you, Senator. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. As we say our goodbyes, tonight's debate was organized by the Washington State Debate Coalition and its founder, Seattle CityClub. The coalition is comprised of civic leaders, nonpartisan organizations, colleges and universities, and media partners committed to setting a high standard for debates, thanks to our lead sponsors, AARP of Washington, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and the Norcliffe Foundation, along with supporting sponsors, the Boeing Company, Smith Barbieri Progressive Fund, and Washington Realtors.
Ballots will be mailed to the voters next week. You must have them postmarked or in a drop box by 8 p.m. on Tuesday, November 6th. And please remember to vote. Thank you again to our candidates and this audience here in the hall.